Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We just take a moment of silence by the time everyone joins in. In the meantime, if someone could please indicate if the voice is heard well. All right. So, very warm welcome. And today we will be talking about and also experimenting in meditation with magic of remembrance. There are two keywords that we are going to explore today. One is, of course, magic, and the other is remembrance. When we think of magic, we always think of something that is wonderful, exciting, that gives us some kind of happiness, right? And it is also denoting some kind of change or shift in how things are, and after the magic has happened, how things would seem to be. So that is magic for us. And so, in the spiritual sense, we see that when we shift our awareness uh, from the current thinking being that we are this, in my case, Kanupriya, I'm Kanupriya, and there are so many qualities of Kanupriya or even weaknesses of Kanupriya which actually make me feel a certain way about myself. Whereas now, with spiritual wisdom, we are getting to know that Kanupriya is like just a role that is being played, but the real being, the being of light, what we call the living conscient being, that is actually separate from Kanupriya. And that living conscient being, the being of light, is actually perfect in every sense. So that brings about a tremendous magic in our lives if we shift this awareness from who we think we really are. And so it brings us to the second word that we are going to be focusing on today, and that is remembrance. So, this remembrance, what do we remember? We don't want to remember what creates unpleasant feelings in us and emotions in us, what we don't like to remember. We don't like to remember the past or the old. So, really, when we are talking about remembrance here, remembrance is nothing but we are connecting with that higher self, that inner being of light, that state of perfection, the best of ourselves. And for this remembrance, as if right now we have lost touch with that higher self, the highest potential of each one of us, that inner being of light, which is so beautiful once we start to get to know about it. And so, to make oneself familiar with that inner being of light, that state of perfection, that is what creates true remembrance in this case. And remembrance becomes easy of this state of perfection, and this beauty of the inner being really emerges itself when we connect to the true home of this inner being of light, which we call the spiritual home of the beings of light, because that space, that dimension, which is non-physical in nature, actually facilitates or is already in that state where one can easily connect to the perfect state of the inner being. So these are the main two things that we could start to focus on: the perfect state of the inner being for remembrance, and also uh, the space or the dimension in which this perfection can easily be emerged and realized, experienced even. And the third aspect is the divine force, the supreme, who's giving us this knowledge of who we really are. So, the more we get to know this supreme being, also helps us in reaching our own perfection. To have someone as a reference, right? To have someone as a reference um, of our ideal state, and someone who actually never loses that state of clarity, who's always in perfection himself, that makes it easier for us to remember our own higher self. And the more we remember him, the more we see that we are bridging that gap um, between what we think we are right now and the weaknesses and the unpleasantness, and where we are headed to our real natural self. And that is bringing about the magic of remembrance. So, for the next few minutes, now we will just sit down to meditate. We choose any sitting posture, and you could sit on the ground or you could sit on a chair, whatever is comfortable for you. And while we choose this comfortable sitting posture, we also make sure that the mind is alert, the back is straight, the head is in the raised position, both the feet are touching the ground. And just relaxing the body, even if there is some pain or tension, you just try and release that pain and tension for the moment. And withdrawing our attention from everything that is external. We focus and pay attention to that being of light. The being of light we see as being separate and independent of the role that is being played, in my case, Kanupriya. We see that there is a beginning and end to the role of Kanupriya and the body. But with this remembrance of the inner being of light, the one who's eternal, has no beginning, no end, imperishable in nature, just a tiny dot, point of light. We connect with that being of light, and we see that being of light in a dimension that is far beyond this physical dimension, which we call the home of light. In that home of light, we see this tiny being of light in its perfect state. Perfection means lacking nothing, needing nothing. we experience a state of being desireless. And that state of being desireless and perfection is naturally possible when we are egoless. No false identities, no egos. We are just seeing this being of light as a dot. None of the physical characteristics coming to the mind. None of the skills and qualities coming to the mind. Just this point of light who is sparkling with beauty. The one who's the child of the Supreme. The Supreme, who's the ocean of perfection, never losing clarity of his own perfection and also the perfection of this tiny point of light. Always seeing with clarity. And this sight becomes natural when one is connected to this dimension of light, the home. The home of light, where there is a family of beings of light. And it is a wonder to see one's own highest self. Where one is always happy. Happiness based on absolute security, which is emanating from that immense conviction in one's own immortality. No beginning and no end. That is like magic. And the more we are able to connect with this being of light, the being of perfection, the more we become that. Just making oneself familiar with one's own self, the real self, the one that is peaceful forever, the one who's pure always, innocent and childlike, not harming anyone, and also very sure that no one is out there to harm him. Nobody can even touch this being of light, who's invisible and subtle. So we just connect with this magical world of remembrance. We see the self as the wonderful child of the Supreme, the perfect one, the ocean of love. So, for the rest of the day, we keep this aim to stay connected with that own perfect state, not needing and wanting anything, no feelings of lacking anything. This feeling of fullness brings about contentment. It is easy to be in this space, just with shifting the awareness of who I really am, staying connected with this point of light, getting to know about this point of light. So we keep this aim to stay connected. And so what we really are doing, and we can keep that in our awareness for the rest of the day, that to have this point of reference, which is the highest, and to remind ourselves again and again throughout the day that this is who we are, this is our perfect state. We are not the one who's getting angry. That is something that has been acquired over a period of time. The more we get to know about this inner being of light, we learn that. So to go back to our original self, the original state, the true experience of this true identity state, this point of light, the more we remind ourselves of that state, the more we become that again. Not just reminding ourselves of this point of light, but also remembering the Supreme, who never loses that clarity. So to have him also as the reference, that really helps us. The more we think about it, the more we understand it, we will see that we will start to experience this magic of remembrance for ourselves and bring about our best, our highest potential, our own higher self in front of the world. And for ourselves, this brings about tremendous happiness and joy and peace, and we live in a world of love then. So I hope this becomes easier for you as we go along this journey of remembrance and discover the magic for ourselves. So thank you all for joining, and we will meet each other again very soon.